through 21, 18 through 21. And before I go into the outline I have with me, were there any verses or any thoughts about chapters 18 through 21 that anyone would like to share with the rest of the class? Yeah.
So you basically have to initiate it all.
Yeah, Gary's talking about you have to, in chapter 18, verse 24, that if you expect to have yourself many friends, you have to first show yourself friendly, and that you have to put yourself out there, and both socially and somewhat vulnerability emotionally, is showing that you can empathize with others, that you can be able to understand what they might be going through without you necessarily having gone through it, but just being there as an encourager, as a motivator, as someone who's able to be supportive in times of need. And so it's good to have friends. And there have been several passages of scriptures that we have read through the Proverbs so far, going back to trying to go back to, where is it at? But what? Yeah.
Nobody was supposed to be there so far. So they know. It's people, and they wrote their mouth. Live, don't have people stand outside. Live, nobody spoke. Did that 2 Sundays in a row, and I have to back. Right across the street, I guess about 2 blocks, 3 blocks, the apartment world.
Mm-hmm.
There's a church drive, I didn't go there, but I passed by, I saw it. Stopped in on something there. And I was walking to the building, people were coming to me against the front door, where about the building. Broken kids, over everything was, and like that. And when I left, I heard everybody in church come by and spoke to me before I left. 2 or 3 Sundays in a row, the same way every Sunday. That's where I wound up. It's been 16 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So going back to being friendly, especially within congregations, and not only receiving brothers and sisters who are visiting, but how does that look to visitors who might not be members of the church? How encouraged would they be or not be if they're not even spoken to when they are visiting that local congregation? And so there is reasons that we need to be, inviting as a congregation, but also individually. What I was looking for was in Ecclesiastes chapter 4. Solomon, who had recorded the Ecclesiastes, talked about that 2 are better than 1. That they have a good return for their labor, and if either of them falls down, one can help up the other, and that's great. That's what friendship is about. And I want to, while we're there, in Proverbs chapter 15, chapter 18, verse 24, he that maketh many friends, in this case, he does it to his own destruction. First, we're studying about the contrast. We had that first line and then the contrast in the second line. In the first line, it says, "He that maketh many friends doeth his own destruction." How is that true? What is that person doing that he's making many friends, or what is he not doing? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. So for those listening online, Jody was talking about that there are some people who are just on the very, very surface of things. They may go around just asking each other, "How are you?" with the simple response of, "I'm fine." Some people may ask, "How are you?" just out of sheer, just wanting to know, more, sheer nosiness, is what I'm trying to say. But in this case here, he does it to his own destruction because he's not setting boundaries on who he's making friends with. He's making friends with those who are unwise. And he's making his own destruction because he's wanting to be pleasing to everyone, and that he himself has compromised any standards that he may have. And as Christians, we're supposed to be a follower of Christ. There's our standard right there. But he that maketh many friends, he's doing it because he's losing that standard. He is making as many friends as possible for worldly reasons as well. He's not encouraging anyone to seek after any wisdom, to seek after the things which are above. He's just after the matters of this world. And so he's doing it for his own destruction. And also, I'm going to elaborate further on both the comments of Gary and Jody, is that he's not, that the friend, he's not spending that quality time to identify who the close friends are in order to share a friendship with, to encourage, to be encouraged. And we look at Jesus and his examples of friendship. He had the 12 apostles. But within the 12 apostles, you had Peter, James, and John. So there was some commonality among them, and that they were able to share experiences, life experiences together. But then you look a little deeper, and that Jesus was especially close with John, who we're told is the apostle whom Jesus loved. He's been that time with John, and there was that close friendship with John, and that they were able to build each other up into edification. And so that's how a true friendship ought to be. Not that on that surface part, just trying to, not having that emotional vulnerability or that spiritual encouragement, but know who our close friends are, so that way when there are times of need, we can go to each other. And so that's why it says that there is a friend, that you got that contrast. But there is a friend that sticketh closer to a brother. It may be times that which we might not feel that we can go to family members about. And I'm going to use the phrase, the literal phrase, closer than a brother. Literally, if we had a brother, we may not feel comfortable going to him about whatever experience we may go in, but we can turn to our friend, someone who might be able to share us more about the experiences that they had, and can give us some insight and some counsel. All right, so thank you for sharing that verse, 18-24. Anyone else have any comments about any other scriptures that we read before tonight's class? All right. So we're going to look into humility before the Lord. In chapter 18, verse 2, "A fool hath no delight in understanding, but only his heart may reveal himself. Verse 3, when the wicked cometh, there cometh also contempt, and with ignominy cometh reproach. The words of a man's mouth are as deep waters, the wellspring of wisdom as a flowing brook. To respect the person of the wicked is not good, nor to turn aside the righteous in judgment. A fool's lips enter into contention, and his mouth calls for stripes. A fool's mouth is his destruction, and his lips are to snare the soul. We're going to stop there and talk about the humility before the Lord. Look over chapter 21, verse 2. Every way of a man is right in his own eyes, but Jehovah weigheth the hearts. And we didn't go into deep detail during our study last week about Proverbs chapter 16 and verse 18. Proverbs 16, verse 18. Pride goeth before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. All right, so about this common theme that we see in these passage scriptures, that humility before the Lord, there's indication that God is not always given praise or credit for the blessings of which one has received, whether those are the physical blessings, but especially the spiritual blessings. And when we read James chapter 4, verse 6, it says that the Lord will resist the proud and give grace to the humble. Who are perhaps some of the kings we could think of which the Lord showed or humiliated them in the sense that they were prideful at first, but they were humiliated, they were brought down to a low level? Who are those kings that we could think of in the Old Testament that the Lord brought them down to a lower level? How about King Nebuchadnezzar? That's what you were going to say? You know, when we think about how he thought that, oh, what a great kingdom I have. And it was just a mighty kingdom, a wonderful kingdom. He thought he did it all by himself. But then the Lord turned him into a beast, in which was despised. He was sent out to a field, and he had to eat within that field for 7 years. But it wasn't until he had recognized the blessings that which the Lord has given him, in which the Lord turned him back to whom he was, physically speaking. But spiritually, he had changed. Who else? What might be some other kings or other examples?
God is good, the Lord God gave him his words.
Well, all right. Well, you think of that. One of the example I thought, one other example I thought was Saul. When I read Proverbs chapter 21 and verse 3, we read, to do righteous and justice is more acceptable to Jehovah than sacrifice. I immediately thought of Saul because of when he was commanded back in 1 Samuel chapter 15 to destroy all the Amalekites, but he did not destroy all that which he was commanded. He was given instructions to destroy all the women, children, and all the animals, and yet he kept the sheeps, and he was approached, Saul, what hast thou done? Or is that sheep I hear? from Samuel. And he says, well, I have done what the Lord commanded me to do. And Samuel told him, you have not. And so the Lord rejected him and had taken away the kingdom from him. And Samuel told him that obedience is better than sacrifice. King Herod, Gary, in Acts chapter 12, verses 18 through 25, was when the Lord caused Herod to be consumed by worms. The angel of the Lord brought him down upon him because he had thought, what a great, wonderful kingdom he had. Who is the ruler of the kingdom of men? Who rules in the most high places? Yeah, the Lord. Because he has during these ages that we are given, the Mosaical age and the first part of the Christian age, caused kings to be glorified or to be reduced. It was dependent on really their character and also how he was going to use them. The Lord used nations for his purpose because the nations had already turned against him. But the Lord Most High rules in the kingdom of man. And it is vital that we recognize the Lord. Vital is probably the best word I could think of, but it is more right that we recognize our blessings come from the Lord. It is proper. It is true. I cannot give enough answers on how we should be giving the Lord praise and glory for what he does in the kingdom of man. But in Proverbs chapter 21, verse 31, says, the horse is prepared against the day of battle, but victory or deliverance is of Jehovah. I immediately thought of David over in 1 Samuel chapter 17 concerning his defeat over Goliath. And when we read, I had marked it, and we read 1 Samuel 45 and 47, it's 1 Samuel 17, 45 and 47, we see David's attitude and how he did not go about it with any pridefulness of his own, but he said, thou comest to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, but I come to thee in the name of Jehovah of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom thou hast defied. This day will Jehovah deliver thee into my hand, and I will smite thee and take thy head from off thee, and I will give the dead bodies of the host of Philistines this day unto the birds of the heavens and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that Jehovah saveth not with sword and spear, for the battle is Jehovah's, and he will give you into our hand. He had the right attitude on recognizing who the battle belongs to. We've seen that song also, the battle belongs to the Lord. And it's a great song, it's an encouraging song, but it's a reminder that it is not about us. That is a very conceitful way of thinking. It's very prideful. There's no humility in all if we think that we're just going about our way in order to make ourselves be glorified. Who is it that in Matthew chapter 5 we're supposed to let our light so shine so people may glorify who? God, our Father who is in heaven. Not ourselves. It is not so we can seek after the favor of men. The seeking only the favor of men causes our own destruction. We see that in Proverbs chapter 18, verse 24. Where we read that earlier. All right, but we need to obtain an attitude of humility before the Lord and recognize that He is the deliverer. All right. Continuing on, another theme that stuck out to me is that of the king. We first read of the king. Let's go back to chapter 16 real quick. In chapter 16, verses 10 through 15, we read something about the king's demeanor, the quality of character that is acceptable to the Lord. 10 through 15 says, a divine sentence is in the lips of the king. His mouth shall not transgress in judgment. A just balance and scales are Jehovah's. All the weights of the bag are his work. It is an abomination to kings to commit wickedness, for the throne is established by righteousness, and righteous lips are the delight of kings, and they love him that speaketh right. The wrath of a king is messengers of death, but a wise man will pacify it. In the light of the king's countenance is life, and his favor is as a cloud of the latter rain. So we see, first of all, the king's demeanor. We see that he is one that's supposed to be the executor of justice for the kingdom which he sees. He has the balance in his hands. He is weighing the law versus that which was committed against the law, and he has to be righteous in his sentence. He has to make sure that the punishment also fits the crime. That's part of what he has to weigh. We see that it's an abomination for kings to commit wickedness, and we have went over examples of kings that had committed wickedness and what occurred to them because of their wickedness. And we see that righteous lips are the delight of kings. They love him that speaketh right. The kings they do not know everything, or they should at least be willing to hear different perspectives of what different experiences may be. Listen to their counselors. Listen to those who are in high places on whatever they are overseeing, whether it's this commerce, whether it's the collection of taxes, whether it is the construction of roads, whatever. They're going to, if they're wise, they will at least listen to those counselors that are under them. But we see the wrath of the king. It says, a wise man will pacify the wrath of a king. Everyone in the kingdom won't know when the king's mad. There will be perhaps some sort of law that will be changed that will reflect upon the king's anger. We think again about King Nebuchadnezzar, about how his councils gave him, they gave him evil advice, and that he had followed that advice, and he wanted to change what was going on in his kingdom. And so we see the wickedness that was done by him. It was out of some jealousy, and was wrathful in that anyone that did not bow to that image would be thrown into that fiery furnace. But the king's wrath will be heard. Proverbs chapter 19, verse 2. verse 12. The king's wrath is as a roaring lion, but his favor is as dew upon the grass. So that's twice we see such a contrast of what the king's wrath is compared to. First is the cloud of the latter rain, because it replenishes the earth. It's calming, it's peaceful. And then we see the favor is as dew upon the grass, that freshness that occurs with that morning dew. It brings it's light. It's very receiving. It's welcoming. But the wrath is, you want to stay away from it. And the king's wrath will be heard, but a wise man will pacify it. We contrast what the foolish man will do to a king in Proverbs chapter 20 and verse 2. Proverbs 20 verse 2 says, the terror of a king is as a roaring lion. But listen to this. He that provoketh him to anger sinneth against his own life, or angereth himself against the king. What does someone think that they're going to accomplish if they try to go against a king that's already wrathful, with wrath? Does an angry king need to be provoked? He's already mad. Why are you going to make it worse? What good is that going to do? He's just going to turn around and take it out on you. You're in his way. He doesn't like you. If he didn't like you before, he doesn't like you even more now. And so you're just putting yourself in physical danger if you're going to provoke the king. And that's sinful on you if you're going to provoke the king. So people need to think about how they speak about our government in high places today. We are supposed to honor the king, as we are commanded in Romans chapter 13. We need to have that respect for those in high places, our government officials, but we do not need to provoke them into anger. We have already read in the Proverbs where a soft answer turneth away wrath. So if we see that the king is wise, we will seek after wisdom. We will want to pacify his anger with words of the wise. The king is, like we mentioned, that he is the chief executor of justice in Proverbs chapter 20, verse 26. A wise king winnoweth the wicked, and bringeth the threshing wheel over them. And in this case, the second line finishes the thought of the first line. The first line is saying that the king winnoweth the wicked. Inexperienced person here had to look it up for a second, but who can tell me offhand what winnoweth means? Oh, okay, yeah. You look like you're raising your hand. Yes. Thank you. Did you have any personal experience? Just wondering. No, but I taught it to my kids. Okay. Thank you. Because like I said, I had to look it up myself. But in that separating the chaff from the grain, and that which is going to be, and we actually see those words which Jesus speaks about how the judgment will be as separating the chaff from the grain. But in here, it says the king will separate the chaff from the grain. He is seeking after the goodness of his people, and that he wants to protect his kingdom from evil men who are causing destruction or harm upon others. And so he's going to determine, well, what should that punishment be for that crime they committed? He's going to be responsible for that. And again, the second thought completes the thought of the first. That threshing wheel will roll right over them, because it is that sometimes punishment or lessons need to be learned the hard way, and that unfortunately there are some people they learn their lesson, and when they violate man's law, the lesson that they need to learn is learn it quickly, and that man's law is and can be a reflection of God's law, but they need to learn to obey and respect man's law, or else they will not obey and respect God's law. And that is when it will be too late. The king reigns in kindness and truth. In Proverbs chapter 20, verse 28. Kindness and truth preserve the king, and his throne is upholden by kindness. It is, again, the second line completes the thought of the first. He is, a king, any king who's going to be unkind or deceitful to their citizens is just going to only expect the citizens to build some sort of anger or resentment to that king or jealousies, and will only want to revolt against that king. And so the king, surely out of the goodness of his heart, because he's seeking after the pleasure of God, will have that desire to rule in kindness and in truth. And then we see in chapter 21 and verse 1. The king's heart is in the hand of Jehovah as water courses. He turneth it whithersoever he will. That Jehovah is over the kingdom of men. Who was it, though, that asked for there to be kings to begin with? What was that? Children of Israel. So it was man's idea, basically, to have that king over them. They said, well, we just want to be like all the other nations, but it was never intended that there would be a king over them or for man. God knew that one day it may come about, so he already had in his plan of the coming of the Christ on what that seed line would be for Christ. But God allowed that request to be fulfilled in order to show them their lesson, and that the king, he will take your land, he will take all your possessions, he will give it among the different peoples. We most certainly have learned our lessons about the evil that the kings can do if they do not turn to Jehovah. But we see time and again how Jehovah has used different kingdoms to fulfill his purposes, specifically the Assyrians and the Babylonians, and how they captured the children of Israel eventually and took them into captivity. And we need to learn that he is still ruling today, providentially, but he is still ruling today. All right, any more thoughts about the king before we continue on? All right. One of the other themes that stuck out to me is even a child maketh himself known by his doings. Proverbs chapter 20, verse 11. Even a child maketh himself known by his doings, whether his works be pure, whether it be right. There was a lot throughout these 4 chapters here about that relationship between the child and the parent, and the parent's behavior and the child's behavior. But could someone would someone be willing to elaborate more about how children make themselves known by their doings? What doings? Yeah. It can be very obvious in that child's behavior about how well they are, how brought up they are, and the actions of that child, whether they be pure and right, or if they're just a terror in the store, that can be just as obvious. Hmm.
Can't trust.
Okay. Hmm. I'm sure you haven't been told that the problem's actually you, right?
Certainly had to be applied.
Implied, but not direct. Uh, Joe, Jody made a good point about the older kids that typically it's just their reputation that precedes them. Yeah. So we're going to go backwards a moment ago now, in this case, and that sometimes their reputation can precede them because of who their parents are in school. And so the children coming along in that same school, now you're whose kids? Okay, I know what to do with you, and I'm sure y'all experience it too. Oh, yeah, y'all are going to be the head of the class. Here's what I need your help with, and you can help me whenever I need it to be. Oh, yeah, yeah. um, because that's a reflection on the parents and how the parents bring up the child. And as long as the parents take that responsibility and accountability, then that reputation of the child will continue on. It is a reflection upon the parents. Um, Absolutely. And so, yeah. Was there something else over here? So again, we have seen several passages of scripture talking about. Oh, and here's one, chapter 17, verse 25. A foolish son is a grief to his father, and bitterness to her that bear him. That's because of their refusal for receiving instruction. And knowing that what wasn't just the instruction of the parents that they refused to receive, though, but their parents are giving the instructions to the child in accordance to God's will. And raising that child. But in this case here, there was a willingness on the child's part not to to refuse instruction. So it's not always the case that a bad child is because there are bad parents. But in this case here, the child willingly refused instruction. And so there was this burdensome on the parents. That can happen just as much as good parents raising good children, is that children refuse instruction of the parents. Keep that in mind, because really we just need to understand that other person and who they are and why they may behave that way. One child, going back to your example, one child may be acting careless because of that's who they are, and that they have a lot of resentment and anger toward everyone else, and they don't know how to fix it, so they take it out on everyone, and it may be a burden to their parent. Yeah. What was that? It's too late. Yeah. It will be increasingly harder, especially when they have to learn their own responsibilities of taking care of themselves. So that will conclude our class tonight. Next week, we'll do chapters 22 through 24. And we see that there's a slight change in how he is discussing wisdom and folly. We see that we started out with what is wisdom, and that there's call of wisdom, and now we're getting into some practical applications of wisdom. We were studying it about just the simple contrast between what is foolish and what is unwise, or what is righteous and unrighteousness, but now we're into just some practical application in chapters 22 through 24. Thank you.